ask you about something else, John. Have you been following the anti-Semitism debate? Kanye West having made some statements, and Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, the New York Brooklyn Nets. That's you live close, don't you?
I do.
What do you think about this upsurge of Black anti-Semitism amongst celebrities, if any, and how it's being handled, whatnot?
There's an element in the Black community of thinking that it's okay for us to be anti-Semitic because Jews are mostly white. So we get a pass because white people are the racists, white people are the ones in power. So we're allowed to not like Jews. But it's bad optics given the Jewish role in the classic civil rights movement, in the fact that Jews undergo considerable persecution, including today. It's bad optics. But the reason it feels so natural to somebody like Kanye is because the Jews are white. And then also, I think another part of it is that sense that Black, Caribbean, and African immigrants tend not to have that Black Americans do. It's one of the main dividing lines, is the idea that it's fundamental to our identity to be aggrieved, that we're owed, that we're victims, that we're just not done right to. That's part of what it's supposed to be an advanced Black person with something interesting to say if you're talking about Black American. And so there's that embrace of the idea that we're supposed to be angry at Jewish people and how they run the world and they run the banks. And, all of a sudden, you have Black people living today who sound like Henry Ford. And, I get the humanity of it. I had a very good friend back in the 80s and early 90s. He was a Harlemite and also a Black Muslim. And he was, a very modern person in almost any way you could think of. But as you got to know him well, you realize that he had this, what I would now call recreational anti-Semitism. He had plenty of, Jewish friends, Jewish more than friends. He didn't have any real problem with Jewish people. But there were all these little offhanded remarks calling New York City, Jew York City, all these little things that it was clear that to him, part of bonding with Black people was to indicate this kind of anti-Semitism. And the way he, as this progressive person, made sense of it, I'm sure. I never even brought it up. At the time, I just thought, this is obviously a pose. It's something he kind of enjoys. We're supposed to bond over this. It's kind of primitive, but who's perfect? I'm certainly not. But the idea is that, well, they're white. And then he could think of the history of Jewish people, quote unquote, taking over Harlem, et cetera, in the past. And so he had that past grievance. But they're white and we're Black. And so we're supposed to be shaking our fist at something. But yeah, that's what's going on with, Irving and West, not to mention that they want to get a jump out of people. But how do you get the jump out of people? The reason that it's going to be that is, I think, that sort of thing.
Wow. Well, I'm from Chicago. I came up in the 50s and 60s. There was a district where you could find pretty good clothing, pretty cheap, from one of a number of different, department stores and sidewalk vendors and things like that. It was Maxwell Street on the near southwest side of the city. And it was called Jewtown. And literally, coming up unreflectively without any thought, people would say, I'm going over to Jewtown to buy a suit of clothes. That's just how you referred to that part of the city. In my part of the city in 1962, it was Jewtown. Nobody meant anything by it. That's just what it was. My uncle Alfred flirted with this Black Hebrew stuff. He was a autodidact type who read this or that little book and came up with theories and, would integrate it with his reading of the Bible. And would come back with, we are the original Hebrew people. He believed that, a lost tribe of Israel. He thought that the quote unquote white Jews, and obviously Jews, is it obvious? You say Jews are white. I think that's in dispute. My friend David Josephson actually has a piece that's going to post at the glenlowry.substack in which he takes up this issue. Jews are not white. He says Jews are Jews. And I see his point. But in any case, it was more specific, this what's going to be called anti-Semitism, this view that is propounded in this film that Kyrie Irving tweeted. That's how he got into trouble, because he tweeted out retweeted some link to something that was anti-Semitic tropes. That's the way they put it. And what I'm saying is, I know this world. I know this world out of which it came. This is the same world out of which Louis Farrakhan comes, the same world out of which the Honorable Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam comes. It's full of conspiracy theoretic stuff. Sure, it's influenced by protocols of the Elders of Zion and a lot else besides. The intellectual historian Wilson Moses has a beautiful book, I think, called Afrotopia, which was published 30 years ago or so, in which he traces the intellectual history of these ideas, which go way back. They go back to the 18th century amongst African descended intellectuals, and not just about Jews, but about a lot of stuff besides. The idea that the ancient Egyptians were flying helicopters and kind of crazy stuff like that comes out of this world. It's of Afrocentric fantasy, Wakanda forever, Wakanda forever. The 19th century version of Wakanda thinking was Black people were once a great people, and they've now been, stymied by the whites or whatever. And the Jewish stuff would fit into that. I heard about Jews in the slave trade when I was, 22 years old. And, I'm not asserting it's true. I'm just saying I heard it. I'm saying it was being said. I once had this conversation with Nathan Glazer, the late, great sociologist who was at Harvard and, wrote books about American ethnic culture and politics and social life. And he stressed the fact that you had this neighborhood secession in a lot of cities where Jews who had been working class and they were shopkeepers and landlords were seceded in the flowing of people into the city, and they moving out to the suburbs, and those neighborhoods come to be occupied by Black populations. But the shopkeepers and the cobbler and dry cleaner establishment and the greengrocer and the landlord and all of that, many of them are still Jewish. And you had this kind of, Glazer was emphasizing this kind of head bumping of friction between people who are on the lower end of the economic spectrum in this kind of urban competitive milieu. You don't have the money for your rent. Somebody's knocking on the door asking for their rent. The guy who's knocking on the door more often than not is Jewish, and the guy who's on the other side without the money to pay is, this kind of thing. This is been going on for a long time. I haven't yet spoken to the question about anti-Semitism. I mean, I have a hard time seeing the phenomenon that I've been describing, which is within certain quarters of African American culture, a embrace of some conspiracy theories and a sentiment of with vis-a-vis Jewishness, which is coarse and is the kind of thing that interethnic relations that you see amongst a lot of different groups. You see it vis-a-vis Catholics and so on as well. So that exists. I have a hard time seeing it as a threat to the integrity, to the safety, to the security of the Jewish community, because these people on the whole are relatively weak. I don't see it as being the same thing as white supremacist anti-Semitism. Jews will not replace us, which I think has a different root, but forced to actually address the issue publicly, I have to say what Dave Chappelle said in his introduction at Saturday Night Live last night, which is, I have a statement to read. I abhor anti-Semitism in all of its forms. And I stand with the Jewish people in their efforts to defend themselves against it. And I abhor anti-Semitism, and I stand with the Jewish people. But I can tell you this, when I did go to the Negev Desert and visit the city of Dimona, I found people from Chicago, Black people from Chicago, living probably without authorization in Israel because they had, quote unquote, come home. Those people actually exist, and they actually believe that ideology. It's a sect. but it is, you know, I met Black people from Chicago in Dimona claiming to have come home. Now, you can call that anti-Semitism. I don't think it does justice to the complexity of it. I mean, but certainly, I understand my Jewish friends abhorring the idea that someone would stand up and saying, "You're all imposters. You white Jews are not the real Jews. It's the Hebrews who are the Ethiopian Jews or whatever it is who are the real Jews." And I stand with my Jewish brothers and sisters in opposition to anti-Semitism in all forms.
So do I.